Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 498, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 8, the topography of the fear of Elohim and how you achieve mastery. The podcast objectives are provide a summary of the primary illustration of the fear of Elohim, analyze the power of knowledge in your quest, review the path we followed to obtain the fear of Elohim, analyze the spiritual topography of the fear of Elohim, and reveal how we progress our quest from the interval of the fear of Elohim. You will always have an opportunity to turn away from evil. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 369 of our exposition of lawlessness. As you know, today's podcast is the last podcast in the leading phase of this exposition. And so I will do my very best to make this podcast one that you will always remember. Not only this, but if you recall, we initiated this phase on the first week of July 2024, and we are ending it exactly 1 year later on the first week of July 2025. And now, exactly 1 calendar year from the beginning of this spiritual campaign, you, my friend, are on the verge of reigning over the 16 degrees situated at the foundation of lawlessness. Congratulations. Very well done. Notwithstanding, there is one final lesson I must share related to the spiritual topography of this critical interval in your quest. To wit, we must analyze the various crossings that reflect the fear of Elohim, as we have done for faith, obedience, and virtue. Before we do, I want to briefly recap what we learned on Wednesday. Vis-a-vis, in the most recent podcast, we analyzed the primary illustration of the fear of Elohim and the primary way we unlock this focal power of the Ruach. Along these lines, the primary illustration of the fear of Elohim is a spiritual security system. It is designed to sound a spiritual alarm anytime your heart or your mind is infiltrated by the presence of evil. Here is why. You cannot receive the presence of Elohim and at the same time be infiltrated with the presence of evil. Ergo, as the fear of Elohim is the interval where we receive his presence, its primary illustration must be designed to combat every matter that would cause us to lose his presence. And the one thing all these matters have in common is sure. They all invite the presence of evil. Now, this being the case, the question we should chiefly entertain is this: how do you know when evil is attempting to creep into your heart or your mind? The answer is sure, and it is twofold. To wit, there is a physical response and a spiritual response. Physically, when you encounter evil, your body will experience some visible change. For example, shaking, shortness of breath, or anxiety. Why? It's because your spiritual man is trying to wake up your physical man because they have gotten out of alignment. Now, this reality begs the question: how does your physical man get out of alignment with your spiritual man? The answer again is sure. You are being plagued by complacency and on the verge of committing blasphemy. Now, this is a crucial matter which we must address for the following reason, which I will offer as an inflection point. This is one I advise you to bookmark and never forget. Complacency has the power to neutralize all the spiritual features which the Ruach has placed within your heart and your mind. To wit, the 16 primary illustrations of obedience, faith, virtue, and the fear of Elohim. And this, my friends, is how your physical man can become disconnected from your spiritual man. It's because your fence of faith is not functioning properly. Ergo, your thought dimension is being overrun by negative and excess stimuli. This makes it difficult for your armed guard and watchman of obedience to deal with perilous thoughts, which creates an environment where these thoughts have a clear path into your heart, which will make it impossible for your maid of virtue to keep your heart clean. Here lies the problem. To wit, if your maid of virtue struggles to keep your heart clean, you will eventually find yourself at the doorstep of illicit sin. It is inevitable. It's just a matter of time and opportunity. Notwithstanding, there is something about the fear of Elohim that I haven't told you, which speaks to why the enemy works very hard to prevent you from unlocking this focal power of the Ruach. And as it is so powerful, I will offer it to you as a revelation. Despite the counterwork of complacency, the primary illustration of the fear of Elohim will always function properly. It will never be compromised as long as the presence of Elohim is near. What does this mean? Quite simply, it means that even if every other spiritual feature in your heart and your mind is compromised, and some form of evil penetrates to the very depth of your heart, positioning you to transact sin, your spiritual security system will always, and I repeat, always sound the alarm. And thus, you will always have an opportunity to turn away from evil and depart from sin. Hallelujah. There is nothing you can't do. Now, even though the opportunity to turn away from evil is ever present, you will never experience this amazing last line of defense if you are not following the linear model of holiness. And as you learned in the most recent podcast, this is the primary objective of the fear of Elohim. That is, the dedicated instruction in righteousness, which Isaiah reveals is line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little and there a little. Here is why this model of teaching is so crucial in your quest. You cannot unlock all the gifts and powers of the set apart spirit apart from dedicated instruction in righteousness. And without these gifts and powers, you will never succeed the moment of truth, for you have no prospects of finding or navigating the way of escape. Not only this, but you will constantly fail your tests and your trials, and you will be the biggest loser in spiritual warfare. Now, Here again, this is why I have spent the past 369 days providing you with dedicated instruction in righteousness. In doing so, I have taught you how to unlock all the features, illustrations, and powers of the 16 degrees situated at the foundation of the pinnacle of holiness. To wit, 16 degrees of perfection that make you a true contender for the seal of Elohim and everlasting life. We know this because these 16 degrees empower you to have a mind that is made up and a heart that is fixed to do the Father's will. Not only this, but you have a failsafe that is designed to keep the whole thing from falling apart. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, this is huge. Listen to me. This is the biggest moment we have encountered thus far in our quest. And it is one of the biggest moments you will ever encounter in your life. Here is why. Once your heart has been fixed to do the Father's will, the only thing you need now is knowledge of the Father's will. And Yahuwah will most certainly give you this knowledge because you, for the first time in your life, are able to bear it. You, my friend, can finally handle the truth. Now, that being said, it should be clear that your quest will get a lot less complicated from this point on. Why? It's because you have ascended to a spiritual plane where the true contenders for the seal of Elohim are persistently receiving knowledge of the will of Elohim. And if you don't think this is beyond critical, let me tell you something. If you don't ascend to this spiritual plane, you will never be sealed and you will never be saved. Why? It's because every vision is founded upon knowledge. And where there is no vision, the people are perishing. Ergo, where there is no knowledge, the people are already dead. If you don't believe me, I advise you to search the scriptures. My dear friends, our nation in times past and in times present has constantly been destroyed for their lack of knowledge. For look, listen, it has been written, my people have gone into captivity because they have no knowledge, and their esteemed men are starved, and their crowd dried up with thirst. Therefore, hell hath enlarged herself and opened her mouth without measure. Now, look again, my friend, and listen. Listen, my people have perished for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I reject you from being priest for me. Since you have forgotten the Torah of your Elohim, I also forget your children. Therefore, I suggest you hear me carefully as I say, the only way you will escape the dying fate of those who are without knowledge is if you receive the dedicated instruction of righteousness required to unlock the power of the fear of Elohim. My dear friends, you must remember the secret of Elohim is with those who fear him, and he will show them his covenant. Likewise, the fear of Elohim is an accumulation of all the degrees of faith, obedience, and virtue. And thus, the following is true. The dying nation of Israel is filled with men and women who are without knowledge due to some deficit in their degrees of virtue, obedience, and faith. Here again, this is why Yahuwah has led me to place such a huge emphasis on reverential fear. For your ability to walk in the fear of Elohim is evidence that you are operating at the highest level of all the degrees of virtue, obedience, and faith. 16 degrees in all. And they are hope, trust, reliance, faith, compliance, conformance, transformation, obedience, honesty, righteousness, purity, virtue, values, reverence, worship, and the fear of Elohim. Now, here's a clincher. When you operate in these 16 degrees, nothing can stop you from unlocking any form of knowledge Yahuwah desires to reveal to you. And because there is nothing you can't know, you will find it true. By the knowledge and the will of Elohim, there is also nothing you can't do. Selah. How we got from there to here, where men love Yahuwah and walk in his sphere. Now, these things being what they surely are, we should take a few moments to review how we got from there to here, where men love Yahuwah and walk in his sphere. To wit, we should analyze our progression from faith to the fear of Elohim one last time. My dear friends, we must revisit the path you followed to free your heart and the path you followed to free your mind. Let's get started. Now, in the beginning, you had problems with excess thoughts, and so you went to war, and thus you fought. For lo, these thoughts were formed to make you doubt. Ergo, you sought a way to cast them out. And so, what did you do? You, my friend, focus on the solution and not the problem. And you gave yourself to walking by faith and not by sight. For this we know is good and right. And as you went, behold, offense, for faith had come to save the day. And soon every doubt flew far away. Not only this, but Yahuwah gave you other gifts to ensure your victory would persist. Enter a mind barrier, a mental bridge, and a rock, all of which provide you with a foundation for obtaining the mind of Yahushua Messiah. For look, listen, it has been written, let this mind be in you, which was also in Messiah Yahushua, who emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, and came to be in the likeness of men. Now, for a while, you were doing great, and then it came to be by fate. More thoughts had come that were no good, though you had done the best you could. Your fence of faith was doing fine, and yet you lost your peace of mind. And so, what did you do? Once again, you, my friend, focused on the solution and not the problem. And you came to see, to pass this test, you would have to be obedient unto death. That is, the death of your will. And yet, you survived and are living still. Hallelujah. Now, as you walked in obedience, behold, an armed guard and a watchman. By unlocking this hero, the power was gained to separate those thoughts which should remain from every thought he would discard. And he transformed himself into an armed guard. And seeing these thoughts were draped in doubt, he quickly moved to cast them out. Not only this, but Yahuwah gave you other gifts to ensure your victory would persist. Enter an elastic suit, a railing system, and a spiritual converter, the final pieces required to unlock the power of the mind of Yahushua Messiah. Congratulations. Very well done. Now, you freed your thoughts after you had fought, for every thought of sin was caught. And yet, you had an evil heart that was defiled from the start. And this, my friend, you came to find. Your heart was worse off than your mind. And so, what did you do? Once again, you, my friend, focus on the solution and not the problem on the whole, and you gave yourself to cleansing your soul. And behold, a maid of honor, a leading heroine whose work is demanded, for she purifies our hearts as we were commanded. For look, listen, it has been written, the goal of the command is love from a pure heart, from a good conscience, and a sincere faith. Not only this, but Yahuwah gave you other gifts to ensure your victory would persist, as your heart was cleaned and filled with purity and the highest degrees of spiritual security. Enter a conscience, an escape, and a cleansing fluid to remind you if it must be done, then you can do it. Now, for a while, you were doing good, and then the truth was understood. Your heart was honest, righteous, and pure, and yet it needed to be more secure. And so, what did you do? Once again, you, my friend, focus on the solution and not the problem. And you detected your heart was better off, better protected. And behold, a security system, a feature of the Ruach that sounds the alarm when your heart is close to harm. Not only this, but Yahuwah gave you other gifts to ensure your victory would persist, empowering you to pass each test as you tread the path of righteousness. Enter a spiritual value system, spiritual eyes, and an altar to fix your heart so you don't falter. Now, I said all that to remind you how we got from there to here, all the way from faith to reverential fear. Not only this, but you have passed the ultimate test by defeating 16 of the deadliest degrees of lawlessness. And trust me, my friends, this was no small feat. They came, they saw, and then they were beat. Now, onward and upward, we're pressing on. For though we're all here, tomorrow we're gone. So don't remain where complacency abounds. You must keep moving. Don't hang around, but press your way until you found a higher plane on higher ground. The waterfalls of life. Now, that's a story on how we got from there to here. And thus, the question of the hour is quite simply, where are we? To wit, as it pertains to the topography of the fear of Elohim, what is the nature of the travel? What spiritual terrain are we now crossing? Now, if you recall, the model of spiritual topography is designed to provide physical clarity to your quest, which allows you to better appreciate and understand everything you will experience in your pursuit of the seal of Elohim and everlasting life. Not only this, but the model of spiritual topography is the highest level of confirmation for every feature, illustration, and power associated with the 16 primary degrees of holiness. And if you stay with me, I'll prove it. I'll begin by analyzing the topography of the levels and intervals we have already analyzed, beginning with faith. Per the table below, faith is symbolic of a super forest, and the key to mastery is the application of pressure against your comfort zone. Not only this, but the primary illustration of faith is a fence, and the weapon in your armor that it corresponds to is the shield of faith. Along these lines, a force is outside your comfort zone because there are stretches of darkness which can lead to doubt. And the best way to deal with doubt is with a fence to prevent the stimuli that produces doubt from entering your mind. Likewise, The best way to deal with doubt in spiritual warfare is with a shield. For the fiery darts of the wicked one are draped with doubt. No doubt, I could go through the same sequence with obedience and virtue, but time is of the essence, and so we must keep moving. Per the updated table below, you can clearly see the topography of the fear of Elohim is a series of waterfalls. Now, if you're picturing this in your mind, you should see how this is a natural transition vis-a-vis the transition from a forest to a mountain range to a series of valleys to a series of waterfalls. Now, like the world's forests, the world's waterways are very important, accounting for more than 70% of the Earth's surface, i.e., oceans, seas, lakes, rivers, etc. Not only this, but water is also crucial to our bodies, specifically our metabolic processes, photosynthesis, and respiration. Accordingly, all known life forms are dependent upon water in some way. Now, these things being what they are, the question we should chiefly entertain is this: how does water take on one of the primary illustrations of the fear of Elohim? The answer is sure, and it lies in a verse we have already considered in this series. Proverb 19:23 is revealing the fear of Yahuwah leads to life, and he that has it remains satisfied. He is not visited by evil. Now, in line with this verse, the fear of Elohim, above all the degrees of holiness, is depicted by life. This is more evidence that reverential fear is the interval where you overcome your sinful nature and you stop committing illicit acts of sin. For the wages of sin is death. On the other hand, the fear of Elohim is a fountain of life. It is a path of departure from the snares of death. Ergo, as water is a primary symbol of life, the Ruach has led me to label the fear of Elohim as a series of waterfalls, the waterfalls of life. You are stronger now than you have ever been. Now, even though the fear of Elohim tends to life, you must remember this: life in general tends to chaos and trouble. For look, listen, it has been written, man is born for trouble, and the sparks fly upward. Look again and listen, man is of a few days and filled with turmoil. He comes forth like a flower and withers. He flees like a shadow and does not continue. Now, let me tell you something. This reality of life should not be late breaking news to anyone who has made any real progress in their quest, especially those of you who are following this ministry. Trust me, I have told you this before and often. Vis-a-vis, the quest for holiness is not a cakewalk. Quite the contrary, it is the most difficult path you can follow in this life. And this is why we know it is the only path that could possibly end with everlasting life. You must remember this, my friends. The greatest rewards in life will always require your greatest investments. And as there is no reward greater than everlasting life, there is no greater investment than your commitment to following the path of righteousness. That's the key, my friends. Vis-a-vis, you must follow the path. Look here. You must make the conscious choice to stay on the beaten path, even when the way gets hard. And trust me, at some point, the way will get hard, and it will be harder than you ever imagined. Here lies the inflection, which we have discussed for the full duration of this series. To wit, the reason why The way is hard is because it requires your death. Ergo, you cannot walk in the path of righteousness if you are not committed to dying and being persistently pressed. My dear friends, this is why Yahuwah has designed worship as the altar of your heart. It is because the only way you can live forever is if you are committed to dying every day. For look, listen, it has been written, I die day by day. I have been impaled with Messiah, and I no longer live, but Messiah lives in me. Now, I'm not going to relitigate this matter, but the Ruach is leading me to analyze this critical moment in your quest. After which, we will conclude this podcast and the leading frame of this exposition of lawlessness. Let's get going. Now, to begin with, you must appreciate how you have just completed your journeys through virtue, obedience, and faith. To wit, you have been on a spiritual safari. Ergo, you must consider this. You started out traveling through a series of forests, and a good portion of your travel was in the dark. Then you were climbing rugged mountains, and the only way forward was by following a straight and narrow path and a bridge over still yet troubled waters that took every ounce of faith you had to cross. From there, you found yourself in a maze like valley that had countless entrances and passageways, and yet only one way out. I said all of that to lay a foundation for the following treasure box, which reveals your spiritual estate once you reach the waterfalls of life. Get this. By the time you ascend to the spiritual topography of the fear of Elohim, you, my friend, will be spiritually exhausted and spent. Trust me, traveling through the first three phases of your quest, i.e., virtue, obedience, and faith, will be a spiritually demanding experience. And no wonder, for you are fighting two of the greatest enemies you will face in your quest, i.e., your sinful nature and the ruach of self. Not only this, but you are fighting the climax of these battles in your heart, to wit, an environment that was desperately wicked from the start. Now, all these factors bring us to the following conclusion. Vis-a-vis, even though you will be spiritually exhausted by the time you ascend to the fear of Elohim, you will have achieved your most formidable spiritual state. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, by the fear of Elohim, you are stronger now than you have ever been. Now, this may seem like a paradox, and that's because it is. And yet, it is scripturally sound. For look, listen, it has been written. Therefore, I take pleasure in weaknesses, in insults, in needs, and persecutions, and distresses for the sake of Messiah. For when I am weak, then I am strong. My dear friends, look again and listen. Do not be sad, for the joy of Yahuwah is your strength. Now, this verse lends itself to the spiritual model of accumulation, and it speaks directly to the model of accumulation with regards to the fear of Elohim. Get this. You cannot unlock the power of the fear of Elohim if you are not operating to some degree in all the degrees that follow it. Now, in case you're wondering, that's 48 degrees of holiness, vis-a-vis all the degrees of knowledge, wisdom, temperance, endurance, patience, joy, peace, godliness, meekness, kindness, mercy, and love. Now, as it pertains to joy, I will show you a mystery, to wit, the spiritual model of joy does not and cannot exist apart from healthy measures of discomfort, pressure, and distress. Here is why. True joy is a byproduct of unpleasant circumstances. To wit, true joy rests in your ability to find happiness, pleasure, and contentment in the most difficult situations Yahuwah will allow you to endure. This matter lends itself to the spiritual illustration formerly known as tears of joy. Trust me, you will encounter this illustration often in your quest, and we will address it during our lessons on joy, if there's time for us to do so before the great distress. When you are descending to certain death. Now, I said all of that to prove how spiritual weakness can easily be translated into spiritual strength if you have the right perspective and you are operating to some degree in the spirit of joy. And trust me, you're going to need spiritual strength to progress from the waterfalls of life to the next level in your quest. And that would be knowledge, i.e., the primary spiritual deficit of those who have descended into the dying nation of Israel. Now, this speaks to a unique feature of this interval, which can be clearly understood via the geographical illustration of the fear of Elohim. To wit, there is a small piece of land beyond the base of the waterfalls, representing knowledge, i.e., the next level within the pinnacle of holiness. Ergo, you cannot continue your quest and receive knowledge of the will of Elohim if you fail to reach the small piece of land beyond the base of the waterfalls. Now, this brings us to the question of the hour and the question on the series on prejudice and the fear of Elohim. Vis-a-vis, how are you going to get there? Now, before answering this question, you must consider this. There is no landmass to travel, no cliffs or rocks to descend, no opposing valley or slope or decline. My dear friends, everywhere you turn, all you see is water, except for the small piece of land you must get to. That being said, how will you safely descend onto the small piece of land at the base of the waterfalls? The answer is sure, and I am sure you know what it is. Enter truth. Now, this matter speaks to a key revelation about truth, which I advise you to bookmark and never forget. Truth is your all-purpose device for all things spiritual, for it has some relationship with every degree of holiness. In particular, the source of the elastic suit of compliance is truth, which in this case retains a buoyancy to water. Ergo, while the disobedient and non-compliant reach this interval in their quest, and they drown in heresies, lies, errors, and false doctrines, you, my friend, will survive a terrific descent down a spiritual waterfall, and you will be guarded by truth until you reach dry ground. Praise Yah. Now, if you're wondering how I know these things, to wit, how I can describe this experience in these terms, it's because I've lived it. Brothers and sisters, I know how it feels to obtain the fear of Elohim because I've done it. Not only this, but I'm still doing it. And I'm telling you, it is one of the hardest things I have ever done. Likewise, it will be one of the hardest things you ever do for the following reason, which I will offer as an inflection point. you will fail to navigate the waterfalls of life if you are unwilling to allow certain parts of your physical nature to die. And thus, we conclude the only way to succeed the test is by being willing to plunge to your certain death. This brings me to my final question on this series and this leading frame in our exposition of lawlessness. Vis-a-vis, how will you make the descent when you are descending to certain death? The answer is sure, and I will answer it in two parts, and then we will conclude this podcast. I promise I am almost done. Now, first and foremost, you must appreciate the manner of death you are dying. To wit, you are dealing a death blow to your sinful nature and the ruach of self, a villain and a thief who both deserve to die. My dear friends, they must die, for this is the only way you can live forever. Not only this, but whilst you take the leap of faith and descend this waterway, your spiritual man or woman is being quickened, renewed, and made alive. My dear friends, remember what I taught you vis-a-vis where there is a decrease in your physical nature, there will be an increase in every faculty, feature, and power of the set apart spirit of Elohim, which is dwelling within you. Ergo, even though your physical man is being disciplined and it feels like dying, your spiritual man is growing up, even though you feel like crying. And yet, you must grow up to be transformed, for this is the process in which Messiah is formed. Now, this brings me to the second part of this answer. To wit, your descent at this interval is a leap of faith. Ergo, you must believe Yahuwah is going to catch you. You must be persuaded that he will not leave you hanging. He will not let you fall. Not only this, but it is also a test of obedience. To wit, the leap of faith is not an option. Quite the contrary, it is a command, and you must be willing to guard the command in obedient faith with your life, which is why it requires your death. For look, listen, it hath been written, be faithful unto death, and I shall give you the crown of life. And present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Not only this, but your descent is also a proving grounds for virtue. To wit, you must choose to take the leap of faith. And like many who came before us, you must decide within your heart to guard the command of Elohim, even in the face of certain death. This speaks to the primary objective of virtue, vis-a-vis choosing the Father's will in every situation, regardless of the nature or the outcome of the command. Ergo, if you have made his will your choice, then you will take the next step and submit to his voice. Now, I wish I could tell you that all who receive this commission will take this leap of faith and free fall all the way to the point of submission. But if I did, I would be lying. Alas, the majority in this nation have no idea what it means to submit or to live by faith, which is why they are all dying. It's because they don't have what it takes to contend for the seal of Elohim or everlasting life. And if you think you do, here is the last word the Ruach has for you. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. Your spiritual destiny is determined by your ability to succeed each moment of truth in your quest. And the most critical factor of success is your ability to operate at the highest spiritual level when confronted with the highest levels of pressure and stress. Now, plainly speaking, what you chiefly need is the spiritual clutch gene. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, none of this teaching will have any value if you fail to apply these lessons when the stakes are highest. Trust me, there is little to no pressure in hearing the word, which is why salvation is not in hearing the word. Quite the contrary. Our salvation lies in doing the word and applying every lesson you have learned in every situation you are in. And thus, as it pertains to the leading frame of this exposition of lawlessness, the time for hearing is coming to an end. My dear friends, now is a time for practice. Now is a time to do what you heard. For we cannot be saved if we are not doers of the word. Hallelujah and Amen. These are the words of the fear of Elohim. Now, here is the final word. The chosen are singing loud and clear. In Yahuwah we trust, and in Yahuwah we fear. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, today is indeed a very fine day. For if you have been following the teaching and the training, and if you have been engaged in your spiritual practices, today marks the beginning of your reign over the deadly spirits of prejudice and contempt. Now, let me tell you what this means with regards to these last days. Vis-a-vis, it means you are qualified to obtain the seal of Elohim, which is crucial, seeing as the sealing of the set apart ones is coming to an end. My dear friends, I've been saying this for quite some time now, and we should consider ourselves very fortunate to have been given this time and space to make our calling and election sure. Now, let me tell you something. There is a reason Yahuwah led me to classify every podcast I have taught you on lawlessness as an end times lesson. To wit, there is a reason why this podcast is entitled End Times 498. It is because your victory over lawlessness is the most critical factor in your ability to survive these last days. Why? It's because you will never be sealed if you're operating in lawlessness. And seeing as the vast majority of our nation are still in captivity due to lawlessness, Yahuwah has raised up watchmen to turn the attention of the spiritual nation of Israel back to the main thing. Listen to me. While the enemy is distracting the goats, dogs, and pigs in this nation with trivial matters, while he is deceiving petty fools into making mountains out of molehills, Yahuwah is leading us down the path of righteousness, and we are presently being sealed. Heretofore, I recommend don't be distracted by all the noise, and don't be discouraged by the fact that the majority within this nation are frauds and pretenders. On the rather, continue in your pursuit of the kingdom of Elohim, his seal and his righteousness, and be thankful, for he has transformed you into a true contender. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on all the lessons you have heard this week and ask the Father to give you clarity on anything you are struggling to receive. And if you are led, please feel free to reach out to me. You can fill out a form on our website and let us know what questions you have. And remember, the only question that can truly hurt you is the one you fail to ask. Last but not least, enjoy the upcoming Shabbat and the weekend, and be ready to get back at it next week as we continue to make our calling and election sure in pursuit of the precious and priceless seal of Elohim. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 498, Reigning Over Prejudice, Part 8. From now, I will provide a summary of the first phase in this exposition on lawlessness, and I will let you know where the Spirit leads us from here. I will post this podcast in 2 weeks on July 18th, 2025. In the meantime, I encourage you to go back and listen to any podcasts and or videos you may have missed, or any podcasts or videos the Ruach is leading you to reconsider for such a time as this. My dear friends, you must remember these lessons are your foundation, and you will get nowhere in your quest for the seal of Elohim and everlasting life if you do not develop a firm foundation. Selah. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end